Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for being on time. We are going to begin the webinar shortly. We're just going to give some people a few more minutes to log in because there are quite a few people still logging in and getting settled. So we'll be back a couple minutes after the hour. All right, we are going to get started with today's webinar that is titled, What Will NEM 3 Mean for Commercial Solar and Storage Projects in California? Thank you all for being on today. We are going to be diving into everything related to NEM 3. This has been a really hot topic. Our team gets a lot of questions about it as we get closer to an implementation date, and our team has been working really hard on researching and analyzing what this NEM 3 change is going to mean for your projects. We are working on some blogs and some guides related to NEM 3 that we'll be publishing in the coming weeks, but we did want to host a webinar just to kind of start getting you educated about what this is going to mean. Some quick housekeeping items before we get started. We will be recording this webinar and sending it out to everybody that registered afterwards. We'll also have a lot of valuable slides in this coming presentation, so we're going to be including those as well. We always do our Q&A at the end of our webinars. You can chat your questions into the chat box and we will try to get to them at the end. We have a lot to cover and we want to be mindful of everybody's time. So if we don't get to them all, we will be reaching out via email to get those questions answered for you. We have a great lineup of presenters on today's webinar. We are happy to have Brad Hevner. He is the policy director at CALSA. Most of you probably know him. He's been very involved in NEM 3 and getting, the proceedings and getting the responses together and advocating for our industry on that. Erin Christensen, she's the technical content specialist at ETB, and she's been publishing a lot of NEM 3 related content into our newsroom. And Adam Gerza is also going to be on reviewing case studies and analysis that compare NEM 2 to NEM 3 project economics and modeling NEM 3 economics for your customers in our platform. So with all of that being said, we want to kick this webinar off. We have a lot to cover, so I will pass things over to Erin.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. I am going to go ahead and jump right in. We have a lot to cover today. Recently we published a blog that covers the NEM 2 to NEM 3 transition and what grandfathering protections can be expected. The first point I want to make is that the specifics have yet to be finalized. When the CPUC releases their proposed decision in December, the how and when of NEM 2 grandfathering should become more clear. But as of right now, this is what we know. Within the final decision document that adopted NEM 2, it states that 20 years from the customer's interconnection under the existing NEM tariff is a reasonable period over which a customer taking service under the existing NEM tariff should be eligible to continue taking service under that tariff. Furthermore, the document states that this decision should be applied to customers under the NEM successor tariff as well, to allow customers to have a uniform and reliable expectation of stability of the NEM structure under which they decided to invest in their customer-sided renewable DG system. It is highly unlikely that customers currently enrolled in NEM 2 will experience any changes made to grandfathering provisions, but newer NEM 2 customers may. The IOUs have proposed shortening the NEM 2 grandfathering or legacy period for customers that are in the contracting process at the time of the CPUC's NEM 3 final decision. Their proposal states that instead of 20 years, these customers would receive NEM 2 treatment for only 3 to 7 years, dependent on the utility. We expect that a customer's interconnection application submittal date will be used in determining NEM 2 grandfathering eligibility. For non-residential customers, applications can be submitted before system installation, but must be for a nearly final system design. Material changes will most likely require an application to be resubmitted, which would result in a loss of eligibility if not processed in time. All in all, customers should be aiming to have applications submitted prior to January, if at all possible, to ensure grandfathering under NEM 2 for 20 years. Everything after January is still to be determined. This next slide pretty much displays the best case scenario outcome of the NEM 3 proceeding, a glide path framework that eases the market into lower export values based on a step-down schedule. The top table was included within SEIA's initial proposal submitted in March. The 5-step framework sets export rates at a defined percentage of utility retail rates, decreasing with each step. Step 1 of SEIA's glide path includes the requirement of enrollment under a predetermined electrification rate, which would be an untiered rate that includes an aggressive time of use charge structure. One of the reasons provided by SEIA for instilling this type of rate design is to encourage the deployment of energy storage systems. As SEIA's table indicates, the progression of steps would be triggered by aggregate megawatt capacities of solar and solar plus storage installations, a methodology similar to that of the California Solar Initiative program. The other two tables on this slide were taken from CalSA's proposal. The one on the left is similar to SEIA's in that it expresses export values as a percentage of retail rates, but unlike SEIA's, the percentages are applied starting with step 1 and would begin immediately upon implementation of NEM 3. Shown within a separate table not included on this slide is the megawatt capacity threshold for step transitions, each step designed to take roughly 2 years. For both SEIA's and this glide path proposal of CalSA's, the avoided cost calculator does not have any impact on export rate setting until after the life cycle of the glide path. Both parties did reference the 2020 ACC though when determining when and at what level to end the export compensation step-down schedules. We'll dive more into the avoided cost calculator in a few slides, but for the purpose of this slide, I'm just going to reference the update that was approved in June. The modifications made resulted in export values being cut by roughly 1/3 when compared with the 2020 ACC values. This significant reduction prompted CalSA to create and present an additional glide path framework for the CPUC to consider, which is illustrated by figure 11 on this slide. Each step of this glide path framework includes a percentage change between the export compensation of the previous step and the values derived from the ACC at the time the step is implemented. For example, if step 3 were implemented in 2026, the export compensation rate would be reduced 50% of the way between the step 2 value and the 2026 ACC values. Each of these glide path proposals include a 20-year term of locking in vintage export values. This means that for 20 years, a customer's exports would be compensated at a rate that's based on the step that is in effect at the time of interconnection. It's important to note that these successor NEM tariff proposals focus on the residential market. Both parties share the standpoint that changing NEM for non-residential customers is currently unwarranted and that the Commission should maintain the current compensation structure for those customers. Goes without saying, but unfortunately we don't expect the commission to do so. This next slide changes perspective and looks at the IOUs successor net metering tariff proposal. PG&E, SCE, and SDG&E jointly submitted a proposal for what they've termed a reform tariff. The reform tariff includes an export compensation rate that uses avoided cost values, instantaneous time of use netting with monthly true-ups, and a monthly fixed grid benefits charge based on system size. There's no mention of a glide path in any of the documents submitted. Instead, the IOUs have proposed transitioning customers to this reform tariff promptly after the commission issues its final decision. The export compensation rate would be based on the avoided cost calculator using a 1-year forward estimate with time of export periods. Rates would also be capped to not exceed each respective IOU's volumetric commodity rate. With the desire to keep export rates fluid, changing based on annual adjustments made to the ACC, the IOUs are proposing no legacy treatment under the reform tariff. This means that customers would not be able to lock in vintage export values. This next slide shows the grid benefits charge I mentioned being included in the IOU's proposed reform tariff. The grid benefits charge is a fixed non-bypassable charge based on system size or installed capacity. As you can see, the dollar per kW DC charge amounts are pretty significant. Shortly, Adam will be showing how detrimental fees of this magnitude would be for C&I projects. Several parties, including the Utility Reform Network and Cal Advocates, have included solar fees within their proposals. The thought is that an additional charge assessed only to solar customers is necessary to recover distribution, transmission, and non-bypassable charges that might otherwise be avoided, resulting in a cost shift to non-solar customers. The IOUs state within their proposal that the grid benefits charge would initially be set at the same level for both standalone solar and solar paired storage installations, but request this be revisited after NEM 3 implementation, stating that the grid benefits charge would need to be refined with the cost shift from solar paired storage growing as adoption increases. They have also stated that the charge would be updated annually during each utility's respective annual consolidated filing, which typically occurs each January. My last 2 slides are focused on the avoided cost calculator, how to access and navigate the workbook along with the export compensation values we calculated and used within the runs Adam will be presenting. The ACC was originally created by E3, Energy and Environmental Economics, Inc., to aid the Commission in demand-side cost effectiveness proceedings. The calculator generates hourly avoided cost values, the amount a utility saves when distributed energy resources are installed. The ACC is housed in an Excel workbook. To access the calculator, visit the link provided on this slide and download the 2021 ACC Electric Model Excel. User inputs can be found under the Dashboard Viewer tab. Here, you'll select the utility and climate zone in addition to the start year and levelization period. For the purpose of this webinar, we set the start year to 2022 and the levelization period to 1 to look at single year values. The 8760 hourly results will be displayed within the total levelized values column found within the table below the user inputs. We use these values to calculate export values per time of use period for each IOU. A quick note that I think I may have already mentioned, the avoided cost calculator is updated annually. Modifications are made based on current market conditions. The 2021 update that took place in June was pretty drastic, causing the quote value of solar to be cut by roughly 1/3. We expect that the 2022 modifications that will take place sometime next year to generate values that fall somewhere between those of the 2020 ACC and the 2021 ACC. We took the total levelized values generated by the calculator and formatted them per time of use period for each IOU, which is what the tables on this slide show. These weighted averages use raw ACC values. The utility's proposal suggests weighting the 1-year levelized avoided costs by its collective metered customer's export profile, which would undergo annual updates. The proposal claims that without doing so, the utilities would be overpaying for exports. We aren't sure if the CPUC's final decision will include this type of export value framework, but we do believe that the end state net metering tariff will be strongly influenced by raw avoided cost values. Below the export value tables, you'll see snippets of the time of use periods we referenced. Please keep in mind that certain utility rates, particularly those deemed legacy or grandfathered, have different time of use periods, which may result in different compensation values. Now I will pass the mic to Adam, I believe, to show just how impactful a successor NEM tariff like this would be for C&I solar and solar plus storage projects in California.
Actually, let's go. Thank you, Aaron. Let's go to Brad next, and then I'll pick up the rear. Brad, can you take it away on your side?
Sure. Hi, folks. You see my slides okay?
We got you.
Yeah, they look good.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. Thank you to Energy Toolbase for all you do for the industry and for these educational webinars, for being a good partner at CalSA. Happy to talk to everybody today. It's been an ugly year. It's been a horrible campaign. It's been a rough battle for the past year, and it's still going on for another 4 or 5 months. We're in the heat of battle at the PUC. I can let you know where things stand now. First, a quick look at a few numbers. We have post NEM 2, there were, market stayed steady, probably mostly grandfathered systems, and then it started going down and rebounded in 2020 and also 2021. So this is what it looks like on the solar only side. And then looking at, those are interconnections, and the fear is that there's just a lot of these are slow in the pipeline, and the new application volume is down. And this does show that, although not as sharply as we had feared under NEM 2. But we're certainly fearing a lot worse under NEM 3, and if this is the beginnings of a trend and the policies become worse. On storage, this is certainly not what we like to see. It's a little skewed by SCE, which has a bunch, I think a lot of those are direct utility contracted systems that happen to be behind the meter. But even if you factor those out, it's not the sort of growth we want to see. People are still doing, in terms of actual interconnections, mostly solar only, although we don't know how much of this is due to supply constraints. Could be we're sitting on a lot of contracts ready to install as soon as the hardware comes through. It's hard to know that. But what we clearly want to see, and what we think we can achieve with a smart NEM 3 is this, where we maintain solar, add the batteries to it increasingly, until nearly everything is solar plus storage. That's the goal. Let me take a quick time out and say that we regularly present the market data to our members, and we hope everyone is a member. If you're not, now is the perfect time to join, because it's half off this month, thanks to half of the membership dues from new companies, new members being provided by Energy Loan Network and BayWa. So if you're not already a member, please do join, get a lot of information that can help you. So how could all this be happening in California? It's a question a lot of people have. And one answer is, not only are there 3 big utilities that have been playing hardball politics for a long time, and despite their credibility challenges, they are still big, powerful entities. And then they have friends. The Public Advocate's Office, that is a division of the PUC that sticks up for low-income ratepayers, does not have an environmental focus. It's only looking for the lowest rates possible, and they have concluded that NEM is a big subsidy that needs to change drastically. They are very anti-solar right now, out there campaigning publicly against us. IBEW especially is dominated by the unions that run the power lines, work for the utilities, and they are strongly against us. And there's one environmental group that has just for years been in league with the utilities around the country, making a deal to oppose rooftop solar in exchange for support for energy efficiency. So we have consumer, union, and environmental voices united against us, which makes the politics very difficult, especially here in California. And so this is what they are proposing. Those anti-solar parties have different proposals, but they're all similar. And there are two big ways that they're proposing that NEM change, and several small ways. The big ways are reducing the compensation for exports, the NEM credit value, and adding new fees. So we'll talk about those, and each of the proposals are different, but they're similar to this. These are the single year values from the avoided cost calculator, which only include the short-term benefits. It ignores the long-term benefits of solar energy and solar and storage, which we think is just wrong policy-wise, but it's what they propose. And they also propose no glide path whatsoever, no transition, no easing in toward these numbers, but going straight to 5 or 6 cents per kilowatt hour for all exports. And as Erin mentioned, we have proposed, she showed those percentage reductions, which are just for residential under our proposal. For commercial, the CALSA proposal is zero change to maintain NEM 2. And most of the focus in the proceeding has been on residential. That's where the concern is, and that's where the focus has been. And there's been very little attention on commercial. And some data that shows that commercial customers are paying their fair share. Their cost of service is less than the total amount that they're paying in bills. So there's a very strong case for no change for commercial, but it's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of people who want to have changes that are designed around residential also applying to commercial. And then there are the fees. So these are some very big fees on top of your monthly charge, your current customer charge, on top of demand charges, which aren't even shown in this table. New monthly fees, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per month, just for being a solar customer. And before you even start paying your rates or any of the other fees and monthly charges that are included in rates, to have these solar fees. The extreme example is the $11,000 from SDG&E. And these are actually dollars per kilowatt AC. That was a change that they made mid-proceeding. And so the bigger the system, the higher the charge. I just picked some typical system sizes to demonstrate a monthly fee amount. And Adam will talk later, I think, about the impact this has on project economics. But, these are obviously not small. Here's what we measure. Adam's going to have, I think, a lot more specific and detailed information. But this is what we measured out in some typical systems, going to 14 to 21 year paybacks overnight, even during the ITC, and then post ITC, even worse than that. So that obviously devastating. This would be market collapse if the proposals were adopted as is. Looking at the timeline for implementing NEM 3, we have proposed that NEM 2 continue the full 20-year term until NEM 3 is implemented. And we are telling the PUC adopt a simpler proposal that doesn't take too long to implement. The utilities have said that their proposal could not be implemented until January 2024 for IT concerns, IT needs. And our response is, hey, don't do something so complex that's hard to implement. They could implement a simpler proposal quicker, and we're fine with that. We want to get on with it and just keep NEM 2 until NEM 3 is available within this year. The IOUs have proposed that there be a buffer for 90 days past the decision. I think Erin mentioned January as a target date for the final decision. We're told that there will be a proposed decision in early January, and then it needs to be at least a month before the decision can be final. And it wouldn't surprise me a bit if it were 2 months. It's probably not going to be more than that because there's a lot of interest in getting this done. And so if it's January or February, a lot of stuff is not going to be known until then. Even with the proposed decision in December, things will change in something this big and this controversial between December and January or February. So there are issues that we're not going to know, including these key issues, really how the first customers past the decision are treated. But here's what's been proposed. The IOUs have proposed that starting for the first 90 days, customers go on to NEM 2 for some shortened period of time, less than 20 years. It could be 10 years. It could be less than that. As Aaron mentioned, the utilities have proposed 3 to 7 years, but some number less than 20. And then after 90 days, customers are placed on NEM 2 only until 2024. So you might get a year and a half of NEM 2, but you're effectively a NEM 3 customer. You're on NEM 2 temporarily until their billing system is set up and you're a NEM 3 customer. Cal Advocates, the Public Advocates Office, has proposed something similar but different. They said the first 90 days is you're good. You get the full term of NEM 2, although they separately proposed to cut that term. But treating this proposal separately, they're saying NEM 2 is NEM 2 until 90 days after the decision. And then there'll be what is effectively a NEM 2.5, that there's something that can be implemented right away that you get 10 to 15 years on before NEM 3 officially starts. And so looking at their proposal for, they don't call it a NEM 2.5, it's one way to think about it. This would be, roughly May through a year and a half until it's all up and running. For resident, the first bullet is just for residential. The second bullet, the utilities have said they can't implement. So if that's true, then it can't happen. But the Cal Advocates and some of their friends have proposed that they just slash exports by a certain percentage, and they think that should be easy to implement and could be done immediately. And then the third thing is reducing from 20 years to 10 or 15 years. There's 10 for San Diego and 15 for the other two. So that is what might happen in terms of implementation, but NEM 3, when it starts, would be the full thing without an additional transition. All right, you got to stick this in again. Really, it now more than ever, we need everyone to stick together. Thank you to all of you who are council members. Those of you who are not, now is the right time to join, be part of our work. Talk to Carter, he can hook you up and get that half-off discount for your first year by the end of this month. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but I think we will pass it along to Adam.
Thank you, Brad. I'll share my screen. Hopefully that's coming through okay. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Aaron. Really great summary of all these possible changes that could be coming. Obviously a lot to digest here, and we've been digging in quite a bit on our side, trying to understand, the effect of all of this. And that's really what my section of the presentation is going to focus on. And yeah, really quickly, just reiterating Brad, Kalsa, and gosh, the entire team there, Brad, Bernadette. It's scary to think where this could land without the incredible effort over the last year. So can't thank you enough, and reiterate, Brad, if you're not already a member, please become one. Call Carter, and thanks to all those who have already donated to the NEM 3 campaign, and please give if you can here, because it's so important. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to really jump in and talk about what these changes could mean on savings and on project economics, really mostly focusing on the reduced export rate via the ACC table and methodology that Aaron overviewed, and then also, if you layered on those grid benefit charges, those solar capacity fees on top, where it gets really, really ugly. And I'm going to do all this and kind of demo how to set up and run these NEM 3 scenarios in ETB Developer today, which you'll see we have a really awesome and quick and easy workflow for. So here we go. I am going to start with actually a NEM 2 run. And I think most folks are aware of this new feature in Energy Toolbase that we rolled out earlier this year as part of our V4 release. When you go to view a rate schedule, we really redesigned this interface. I think it's a big improvement to kind of see how these time of use windows are defined. And the one feature in particular, under the energy charges tab, we now are tracking, our rates team is tracking all of the various line item charges and basically saying whether those are, you're getting value when you're exporting back, or if those are NBC charges. And you can both see the granular individual line items. And then what I always kind of go right to is like, what is the all-in, bundled NBC rate in this case for winter season or summer season? So really, really awesome feature. Basically, as a user, you no longer need to, frankly, research what the NEM values or tariffs are, because they all live right here on the tariff level itself. And it's a really powerful feature. And again, this is for NEM 2. So now let's jump and kind of look at how we set this up in a NEM 3 world. Okay, so in this case, I've done this via a custom rate. Our utility rates team, I know we're already starting to get requests, and we're probably going to be getting a lot more, to have our rates team load up some of these proposed NEM 3 rates that have some of these proposed export values. In this case, I'm using the values from Aaron's table, and we're using the 2022 ACC 1-year values. So let's just go in and look at how that gets set up. And this is really simple, frankly. In some ways, it's actually simpler in my mind than the NBC framework, because all of these various line items are imports, right? You pay those when you take from the utility, and then now we effectively just have one line item showing that export rate. And again, there's a lot of work that has to happen behind the scenes to derive these values. You have to take them out of that avoided cost calculator, which outputs an 8760 file, and we're showing kind of the weighted average. And again, these line up with these Aaron's table from earlier. So we're going to have all of these rates loaded up as proposed rates if you request them from us. But again, the point here is it's just really, really simple, frankly, to be able to kind of run NEM 3 scenarios using and assuming those reduced export values. Okay, so that's the setup side. Now let's jump in and kind of interpret what's happening here. This is my first run that we'll look at. This particular one is a commercial load profile. I sized a large solar offset system. I sized 100% offset system. So we're, based on annual usage, we are sizing the PV to meet that 100%. And certainly a value that you'll be really thinking about and looking at more in an M3 world is, well, how much of that generation for this particular customer would export to grid? In this particular run, it was about 50%, about 49%. We can just really quickly visually take a look at that. I think folks know how to interpret this pretty well already. Here's just, this was actually a community center, I believe, on the load profile side. I didn't even really cherry pick one for this case, because you can see this customer actually has a lot of their usage is midday. So when we overlay solar and kind of like start to look at where exports are, I certainly could have chosen a load profile where for a 100% offset system, we're exporting even greater than 50% annually. This one just kind of, that's where it came in at. And then, of course, the big question becomes, well, how much is my solar now worth in a scenario where, in this case, half of my production is going back to grid? That is, half of my production is getting valued at those ACC rates, and half is reducing imports. And this table here is really, really neat, how our software is doing this behind the scenes. I think this is just as transparent as you can be here. If you want to see where those exports are happening and exactly how much you're seeing in each window. And let me pop this slide up here, which kind of takes that same table, and I am basically mapping this with the ACC table that Erin had in her earlier slide. And the answer is, for this particular customer, the average blended value of exports are coming in at about 5.5 cents. Again, this one's based on those 2022 ACC values. Obviously, depending on how the glide path gets implemented, this will change, and we'll be able to model those easily as well. Couple quick things I wanted to point out. In this case, 80% of the exports are happening in the off-peak or super off-peak period. I actually think this is going to be quite common. That's the 189,000, and then the 60,000. On a lot of the runs that I've done over the last couple of weeks, starting to look at this, I was always seeing the average blended value of exports coming in somewhere between 4 and 6 cents. I was doing lots of different types of commercial runs, even residential runs, and that's kind of the range I was seeing. So I would point out, I think it's misleading sometimes to look at these avoided cost calculator like value tables, especially if you see the 28-cent summer on peak, and think to yourself, okay, that's not so bad. But the reality is, again, most all of the production is happening off peak and super off peak. In this case, 80%. I think it's about 8% is happening in the on peak period. So don't look really at these tables. You really need to kind of zero in on what the average blended value is. And again, it's going to be call it in the 4 to 6 cent range on exports. Okay, let me pivot back to my model. And now let's talk about, okay, what does this mean for savings? What does this mean for economics? And the way we think about it, or I'm starting to think about it, is in comparison to NEM 2, right? And that's right, I have one other thing to introduce, which is let's also introduce how we have the ability to account for that grid benefits charge. Right now, we're doing it through a transaction, and we're basically, taking what that proposed dollar per kilowatt of solar capacity charge, the GBC, the grid benefits charge that the utilities put forward, and we're just kind of having you define that. Ultimately, we'll have this live at the rate tariff level. Right now, I just did it through a transaction to kind of, again, comparatively see if we're having to deal with both reduced export rates, how much will that hurt compared to NEM 2? And then if you're having to also on top of that, pay that, in this case, $10.76 per kW solar capacity fee, what does that do to economics? And I've got a slide that shows exactly that. Let me pop that up. Again, this actually, just taking a step back, this was that run, 49% of exports valued at 5.5 cents. The other 50% of exports, the other 51% of PV that's reducing imports, that's valued very similar to how it's valued in an M2 world. And in this particular one, it was 18.3 cents, and that's how we're kind of coming in at that blended value of about 13.3 cents. This is the total average blended value of PV. We're seeing about a 26% reduction in this particular run. And now let me go down here to this table, which is comparing, okay, in a NEM 2 world, using reasonable market assumptions on all of the costing and the incentives, this community center project in PG&E on the B10 rate, I was seeing about a 6.3 year payback, 13.5% IRR, assuming we're having to deal with those 2022 ACC values. Okay, you can see how much the payback period slips a couple years. You're losing a good 3-4 percentage points on your IRR. So that is definitely painful, just as a result of the reduced export values. And now on the far right column down here, if on top of that, you go and layer in that $10.76 per kW grid benefits charge, it just falls apart. That's not trying to be alarmist, or the numbers just really get decimated there. Your payback period would push out above 25 years, and you'd actually go upside down in your IRR. So, I mean, pretty easy to interpret. That just completely crushes the project. Let's look at another run, which I think is really interesting to think about. Pretty much everything is the same here, except for in this particular run, I'm sizing up a 50% offset solar PV system. And I think for a lot of the commercial solar developers on the line here, they know that's probably not unreasonable. It's not, uncommon where, oftentimes you may not have roof space to get to 100% offset. And let's just kind of think about in scenarios where solar, in this case, is offsetting 50% of annual load. Well, how does that affect and play in an M3 world? Number one, as you would expect, we're certainly not exporting as much energy. Whereas before we're at what was it, 49%? Now we're down to only 17%. And why don't I just go right back to my slide? Actually, here's the 50% offset run. In other words, 83% of my solar is worth 18 cents on average blended. 17% is only worth 4 cents, which is how I'm kind of getting to this blended value over here in an M3 world. And the takeaway here for me is that when your system is not sized as large, it's not going to be quite as painful, I think is the best way to say it. We're just not dragging down the total average blended solar value number as much because we're not exporting as much. And I think, again, in commercial applications, that's something to think about because, you're not always necessarily sizing 100% offset systems. I think thinking about residential, I think 100% offset systems are probably the norm. And my back of the napkin value that I always use in a 100% offset system, I think it's probably somewhere in the mean to assume about 50% of that energy would export back to grid. And those are the ones where it definitely would be more painful as a result of those reduced export rates. And then again, on the third chart here, layering in the grid benefits charge, it really does push the project out. But just an important thing to think about, how much exports back to grid and how the solar system is sized relative to load definitely is important in an M3 world. Okay, let's look at my next run, which is storage. And this is an interesting one to look at. This is a church in SDG&E territory. I'm modeling this on the DGR. I'm going back to sizing a 100% offset system. Again, this is kind of neat if you were to go here. And if you wanted to look at how those ACC values are set, again, all of that lives right on the rate tariff level in ETB developer. And these values in this case are getting pulled from Aaron's SDG&E table. So all the setup side is actually frankly really easy. Once it's set up, you can just really quickly run and start to comparatively see what sort of a savings difference and what sort of economics difference we would see. Okay, so this is the solar only run. This is an extreme case where for a 100% offset system, we're almost exporting 60% of that production back to grid. Reason why here, it's just the shape of that load profile with the church. Let's just kind of look at that really quickly. This is real church data. Let's overlay our solar PV production data. And you could just see, like on some of those days where, the church is not really in session, we're just exporting the vast majority of our energy. And when you run that over the course of a 1 year period, turns out 58% of all that production would be exporting back. Okay, now let's go and do what's coming next, which is we're going to add in a storage system and and think about what sort of additional savings capture, we can get with adding storage here. So I just did I chose some pretty round numbers for this particular run. I believe it was a 100 kW, 200 kWh commercial solar system. I'm sorry, commercial storage system. I just kind of generically defined the values here. Okay, and what I'm really keying in on here is like how much will the storage system save? Again, this is in a NEM 3 world with those reduced export rates, and I'd be comparing this back to like what is it saving today in a NEM 2 world? And I've got a slide in just 1 second that kind of compares those two things. Let's just really quickly look at the simulation, and I think you'll make sense of this really quickly. Let me jump into a summer month. I know I'm moving very quickly. Hopefully everyone is following along. And this is a really good illustration right here, maybe this week. So what are we doing with the storage? We are now also preventing exports to grid, which is great. And those are now quite valuable. You know, where my mouse is right here, you know, late morning, we're producing our solar. This otherwise would have been getting exported out to grid. This is pretty lucrative now to self-consume. You can see down on bottom, the average blended retail rate here in this, I believe, mid-peak period is about 27 cents a kilowatt hour. I'd have to go look at the ACC table. If I remember correctly, I think it's about 6 cents if you export here. Okay, so basically, we're able to capture, you know, for every kilowatt hour of solar production, we can prevent exporting back to grid. We would be capturing over 20 cents a kilowatt hour, which certainly adds up. And this is really what the future of, we think, storage looks like in an M3 world. And it'll be a combination of things. It'll obviously be, you know, self-consumption and capturing utility bill savings that way, in addition to time use arbitrage, and in a commercial setting, in addition to demand charge management. It really will be kind of a triple stack in that sense. So let's look at my summary table. I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys at once here. I hope this kind of all ties together on this slide here. And again, so let's kind of over here in this top right table, in a NEM3 world, the average blended value of solar reduces quite significantly here. We're going from 26 cents to about 17.5 cents, about a 33% drop in your average blended value of solar. You can see what's happening on the storage side. This is real data. We're going from energy storage bill savings of $85 per kilowatt hour of storage capacity up to $137 per kilowatt hour of storage capacity, 62% increase. So a really big jump there. In other words, value of solar comparing NEM2 to NEM3 goes down, value of storage goes up pretty significantly, which is good to see in an M3 world. That ties into my next slide. Earlier this year, some of you may remember this, we hosted a big webinar on our masterclass where we did this really extensive 3-month study. We looked at the economics of commercial solar plus storage projects all throughout California. We did this on all the different rate schedules across a cross section of different load profiles. And this slide here, it just reminded me of this. And this was from that deck. And this basically said, across those several hundred runs that we did, you know, across this cross section of, you know, different cases, it basically found that, you know, solar captured and contributed the majority of savings. It was on average 78% of a solar plus storage project. 78% were captured via solar, 22% were captured via storage. So in an M3 world, this ratio will absolutely shift, and we're going to see storage contribute and capture a bigger, you know, piece of the pie. I don't know how much yet. We have not run this, which will be, I think, a really cool exercise. We're going to wait until we get those final rules in December or January. But the point, I think this will absolutely be true in a residential setting, certainly true in a commercial setting, which, you know, value of solar goes down, value of storage will go up. And with that, I think I'm going to go into my kind of key takeaway slide and just recap some of the points I already made. I just made this point, you know, value of solar will be going down as a result of the reduced export values. We're going to have to wait and see how the glide path gets set. It certainly will depend on how much PV you export to grid, which is that 100% offset and 50% offset comparison from earlier. And then a key point just to know, exports, most of them will happen off-peak and super off-peak, which are valued cheap. Again, reduced export values will absolutely hurt. They will hurt very bad. Brad, Kelsa, solar advocates are pushing back hard on this. I would just make the point that, like, if it was reduced export values in addition to those grid benefits charges, it would just be, I think it's a complete non-starter. I just think economics absolutely do not make sense if the utilities got anywhere close to what they're asking for in those grid benefits charges. In a NEM3 world, NEM3 commercial storage, it really will be kind of a three-pronged value capture opportunity: demand management, time use arbitrage, and now, of course, self-consumption. And again, the last point I just made, this is, I am certain, going to be a true statement. If you drew a pie chart on how much, savings storage captures relative to solar, it's going to go up in an M3 world compared to an M2. We know that for sure. And then I think folks are already starting to do this, and Kals has been putting out amazing content and webinars. I think the NEM3 deadline will start to get loom even louder soon, especially when we know that decision, and the market will find out, and certainly it will create a lot of urgency to go. It'll very much be in a customer's interest to get their project in before that cutoff date. And then, of course, that last bullet point, that's kind of a no-brainer. In an M3 world, solar plus storage attachment rates, we do expect to go up quite a bit. Cool. One last slide. I'm going to do 30 seconds here, Tracy, before turning it back to you for Q&A. Everybody on the webinar, I think, already obviously knows Energy Toolbase for our sales and modeling platform. That's ETB Developer. That's what I've been demoing today. We've been in market with that product for 7 years now. I know a lot of our customers are on the call. I just want to make sure, I hope everyone also knows about our Acumen EMS product. This is, of course, our energy storage advanced control software. We're doing lots of cool things here. We're now fully integrated with a number of leading ESS hardware vendors, BYD, Socomec, Delta, Dynapower, to name a couple. We are actively deploying Acumen projects in California. Our sales team's doing an awesome job there. And we are very confident in an M3 world. We're going to be doing lots more of those. So we would love to talk to you and set a call and get you information if you would love to learn, if you'd like to learn about our Acumen EMS and or our ETB monitor product. And with that, Tracy, I'm going to kick it back to you for Q&A. Actually, before I do, Tracy, maybe Brad, I just ripped on a lot of stuff. Anything that you saw in my deck or thoughts or kind of takeaways that you would, I guess, like not agree with, or that you would reemphasize?
Well, yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, there's a lot of very important information. One thing that watching your presentation really did bring up in my mind is the annual resetting of the solar fee, which they call the grid benefits charge. And the way that the utilities have proposed it, the fee is designed to basically claw back the value from self-generation. Their proposal is to reduce the value of export compensation and to charge you a fee based on what's behind the meter. So you get to keep some savings behind the meter, but they basically claw back everything but avoided costs or wholesale. And so that involves an estimate of the percentage of generation that's behind the meter. That's how they create the solar fee. Is it's modeled out how much production is and how much they expect to be behind the meter based on actual average of all customers. So if what you say is true and the switch to storage is, and what I was suggesting we were striving for, you're suggesting is very realistic. If there's a very rapid change towards self-consumption where more of it is kept behind the meter, those solar fees are going to go up. So we can't battery our way out of this. If those proposals are adopted as proposed, the more self-generation just means higher solar fees. Now, we don't know if it's going to be adopted as is, but that is a factor that we should all have in mind. And one other thing that I should have mentioned earlier that I'm sure people are curious about is the trigger for eligibility. I want to make sure everyone is clear, especially on the commercial side. On the residential side, you're pretty much applying for interconnection when you install a system. So you want to be installed by January, February, March. For commercial systems, it's the initial interconnection application, which often happens well before building the system, right? So you have to have the design in. you have to have, you have to have the design set to the point where you're not going to change it significantly later and have to reapply. But if you put in an application that's got the design and the point of interconnection set, and that application remains active without being required to resubmit, then you are under, you're before the deadline. You can build it after NEM 3 begins, as long as you've put in for the system before and you don't make material modifications to the application.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. We will, I guess, jump into Q&A. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but we will hit on a couple. Adam, I know you're probably skimming the Q&A here, so please answer any that you would like to. Couple questions just to reiterate. Recording and the slide deck is going to be sent out to everybody who registered, so just be on the lookout for that. Couple questions on the grid benefits charges. I think, Aaron, this one came in during your segment. Is the grid benefits charge a monthly or annual charge, and are they proposed for residential projects?
Thanks, Tracy. It is definitely a per month charge. So as you can see in the tables that both Brad and I presented, we've showed you those monthly figures. It's definitely going to add up to a pretty substantial amount over the course of a year. And they are being proposed for residential customers as well. For the purpose of this webinar, we were focusing on C&I, but if you'd like a little bit more information on what those fees look like for residential customers, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can definitely point you in the right direction there.
Great, thank you. Aaron, another one quickly to you. Will grandfathered projects under NEM 2 be impacted by the proposed NEM 3 export values?
So for customers that are currently under NEM 2, we don't expect that they will be impacted by the NEM 3 export values until the end of their grandfathering term. But like Brad mentioned too, kind of it's up in the air what's going to happen with those customers that get in NEM 2 within kind of like that buffer period. We're not quite sure, how long they'll be grandfathered under NEM 2, but for customers that already locked in that NEM 2 grandfathering, they shouldn't be impacted by the decrease in export values until after the end of their grandfathering term.
Thanks, Aaron. Brad, for you, on the slide where you estimated the payback periods under NEM 3, did those figures assume storage or solar only?
Those were solar only figures.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Adam, please jump in if you have any you want to answer here. But
maybe I will jump in with one, Tracy. I'm seeing it a bunch in the chat, and this is our sales team is going to get a lot of these. Those custom NEM 3 rates. Can you load them up in our account? When will those be ready? We are doing a big internal meeting tomorrow for figuring out our procedure for that. So the answer is we will have those. I think it makes sense to kind of make that request through your account manager or certainly direct to the rates team. Again, it'll be really dependent on, I think it will make sense to run if I was a developer out there selling the 2022 values, and I would say, hey, look, this is exactly what the IOUs are asking to implement, and they want to go to day one, like Brad said, they don't want a glide path. So I think you have justification for saying, hey, that is on the table. But then certainly, like based on the glide path and how they get phased in, it will change. So the answer is we will have those. We're kind of getting set up on our side, so you might have to give us a little time. And in the meantime, it's actually super easy to create those yourself, and you can use Aaron's table. But we'll have those very soon.
Thanks, Adam. Another one on grandfathering, Aaron. Do currently installed PV systems keep 20-year grandfathering, or are they also subject to a limited grandfathering period?
So I think I kind of touched on this with the last question too. So if customers are currently receiving NEM 2 grandfathering benefits, they shouldn't have any change to their grandfathering 20-year term. The question is what's going to happen to those customers that submit their interconnections during that kind of like buffer period. That's during the time the IOUs are proposing something less than 20 years, 10 years, 3 to 7, whatever it may be. But customers that currently are receiving service, NEM 2 service, we don't expect any sort of change to occur to their grandfathering term.
Yeah, let me jump in. I agree with that. Our expectation is the 20-year term for existing customers will not be altered, but there are proposals to do so, not from the IOUs, but from the Utility Employees Union and from Cal Advocates and others. There are proposals to cut back the 20-year term for NEM 1 and NEM 2 to something much less, maybe 8 years, maybe something else. There are various proposals out there. I hesitate to have any crystal ball on anything, but it is my expectation in line with Aaron's that those will not be approved, and it's completely legitimate to give customers expectations that install today and you'll get 20 years.
Thanks, Brad and Aaron. I know we are past the top of the hour here, so I think we're gonna stop with our Q&A for now, but I just wanted to see if there's anything, Brad, Aaron, Adam, you wanted to add before we kind of wrap up.
I've got one last one for Brad. I saw this one in the chat a lot, and I'm thinking the exact same thing myself. On the grid benefits charges, Brad, your read of the tea leaves is probably better than anybody in the state. What's, I don't know, your gut tell you for, like, I don't know where the PUC lands both residentially and commercially? I know the proposal on commercial is don't have them at all. What is the range of outcomes we could see on those grid benefit charges?
The range is absolutely 0 to the full proposal, probably less than the 100% of what the utilities have proposed. I think what they've proposed is just, it's stretching the bookends, and they don't expect to get their full numbers approved, but half that would still be devastating. And I really hesitate again to have a crystal ball on any of this. And I think in response to the question of what's the range of possibilities, 0 is very possible, and half of what the utilities have proposed is entirely possible.
All right, well, thank you to Brad, Aaron, and Adam all for being on with us today. We didn't get to all the questions. As we said earlier, we will be trying to do some outreach via email to the questions that we didn't get to answer. If you are an ETB developer user, you can contact your account manager and they will help you out with any questions you need answering. And for anybody who's not an ETB developer user, we'll have a link to our free trial so you can access our platform for 2 weeks for free, and be on the lookout for that email from us and GoToWebinar, which is going to have the recording, the slide deck, and some other helpful links from today's webinar. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you all for being on today, and thanks again to our speakers and Brad specifically for presenting today. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.